What's up, Set Apart Women? I'm your host, Jamie Lynn Wallnow, and this week's episode is so good. My sweet friend, Betty Joyce, is here to talk about grief, forgiveness, and disappointment. And let me tell you, she dives in. It is so beautiful. You just feel like the peace and healing heart of the Father all throughout everything she shares. And our desire is for you to grieve with God, to forgive the way God created you to, and to come out on the other side bearing the fruit of the Holy Spirit. It's possible with God. So please like, share, subscribe, do all the fun things. And without further ado, let's hop into Set Apart Women. Welcome back to Set Apart Women podcast, where we demolish the lukewarm living and follow Jesus with all that we have. What's up, Set Apart Women? You're in for a treat today. I'm so excited. One of my sweet friends, Betty Joyce, is here, and we are talking about grief, and we're talking about disappointment, and we're talking about what God can do through these moments. She has a beautiful story to share with us about how God came in and helped her overcome a long season of grief and disappointment, and she's bearing fruit in this season from turning to the Lord. And so many of us have, like, at some point in our life, let's be honest, we battle grief or disappointment, and it can be really hard. It can feel so lonely. It can feel dark, but God did not intend for you to walk through this alone. And I'm very excited and honored, Betty Joyce, that you are here today. How are you doing, lovely one?
I'm doing amazing. It's so good to be here. I'm so honored.
Me too.
This is awesome.
This is so fun.
It's so fun.
It's like so professional.
And you were in your element.
Oh,
I'm loving it.
Come on. I am loving it. I love it.
I love it.
I just, you and I get to grab coffee and lunch, sporadically throughout each beautiful year. And I love getting updates on your life, and I love hearing your heart for the Lord. And you're one of those people who you've gone through a lot, and I do want you to share your testimony, but even through like the pain or the disappointment or the grief, there's been this you've been vulnerable and real about it. You haven't been like, oh no, I'm fine. Like, you have people in your life that you're real and authentic with and transparent, but you've invited God into every part of it. And we've all seen him supernaturally invade your life and transform the situation. So I just want to say how much I love you and admire you in the way that you live your life truly and authentically before the Lord. And I'm honored that our Set Apart Women crew gets to hear from you today.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be here.
Well, would you please share your testimony? Because a lot of women, clearly, first of all, you are like so talented. I haven't really been doing people's resumes because I feel like I know all these people personally. But I was like, Betty Joyce, you just won some epic real estate award here in DFW, right?
Mm-hmm, yeah.
And then you are an incredible worship leader. You're an incredible friend. You really celebrate people well, and you're really good at being there for people.
Thank you.
And you have so many talents and gifts to share. And so I just, first I want to say we get to hear from her, but also would you jump in and would you share your testimony? Like, why are we talking about grief and disappointment? What brought this subject upon
What brought
your
this
life?
about?
Yes.
What brought this about? Yeah. So it's funny. I went through, it's not funny. It's
funny.
not funny at all, actually. But I was married for 6 years and married to a worship leader. We were both worship leaders together. He was on staff at our church. And in 2020, the world just caught on fire in 2020. Everybody was unwell. And it was funny because I told a lot of people that year, I was like, I think this is going to be the year of great exposure. Just because anytime you get still and you get quiet is kind of when your stuff comes up, right? That's why a lot of people don't like to have a quiet time, because it's like, whoa, all of a sudden you're thinking about this thing that you've kind of put on the back burner. And I think especially in America, we just go.
Yeah.
And so when you get still and when you get quiet, and we got kind of forced to with the pandemic, and all that to say, after just a series, and I won't get in the weeds of everything, but after a series of crazy events, just a lot came forth in my marriage that was very shocking. A lot of betrayal, a lot of infidelity, and it came out. And those things where you're like, that wouldn't happen. Like, that doesn't happen. That wouldn't happen to me. That wouldn't happen in my marriage. That wouldn't happen. And pretty much everything I think I resigned wouldn't happen, kind of did, and then some.
Yeah.
And you know, I walked quite the road. It was pretty public. There was just a lot that came forth, and I mean, it was nothing I was really looking for. As far as like, I wasn't in there like trying to find something out, you know, where, you know, and as the first pretty big affair came out, I mean, I was absolutely devastated.
Yeah.
Like just the betrayal and the, you know, where your brain goes to. And that's why I have such a passion for the topic of grief and the topic of forgiveness. And really, you can't fully forgive unless you fully grieve. And I think that's something that in the church, we can kind of sidestep the actual grief process. Wow. But all that to say, and I was devastated. I was also a little bit relieved when I found out, because it made sense. I was like, oh, I'm not crazy. Because there was a couple months leading up where I knew something was wrong, but it was just, I was like, is there infidelity? Is there a woman? Is there, you know, addiction? Like, I will roll up my sleeves and get in the mud with you. And it was like, absolutely not. You know, you're just accusing me. And there was this dynamic where I would apologize. I would say, oh, I'm so sorry. I'm not trying, you know, and then I felt really crazy. So when I talk about my story, I like to acknowledge that part, because as I've talked to other women who've gone through, and men who've gone through, infidelity and betrayal, there is this piece of it that we don't really talk about, which is kind of the like, oh, this is what's going on. I'm not crazy, especially if it's this big hidden thing, which most of the time it is, right?
Yeah.
And so all that to say, and I fought so hard. I thought we were going to be able to work it out. I wanted to forgive and get through. And there was just a lot of lies. I mean, the lies, it was insane. I could write a book about it. But all that to say, I had quite the road to walk. And I think what's interesting specifically with infidelity and betrayal is this one of the stages of grief, which is bargaining. And you kind of go in this place where you're like, well, if I could have done this, if I could have said this, if I could have been better, if I was prettier, if I was skinnier, if I was funnier, if I was more successful, then this wouldn't have happened.
Right.
And when I really was able to process that that's a stage of grief, that was really helpful for me. Instead of going, because you can just live there.
Yeah.
I could live there. Like, well, it was me. I shoulda, coulda, woulda, you know. And then I started realizing, oh, I'm grieving here because this is awful. And it was awful. And as I started to be able to kind of unfold like the steps of grief and then how to actually practically forgive, because I think we talk about forgiveness, you know, oh yeah, I forgive you, you know, and we always want to have a heart posture of forgiveness. But I think that there's actually some practical steps you have to take to quite literally do it, that aren't easy. And so as I processed and walked through and we ended in divorce, which is not what I wanted. And I was really believing that we would restore and that God would redeem. And I love reconciliation. And I was like, oh, we're going to have the best testimony, you know, and we didn't. It ended exactly how I didn't ever think it would end. But through that process, the number one, the community that surrounded me, the women that I had in my life, and I will say, you know, I'm sure anybody that's been through anything really difficult, you have to have people with you.
Oh, yeah.
I think isolation is one of the biggest tactics of the enemy. And even prior to to the affair coming out, I was pretty isolated. I didn't realize it, but hindsight, I wish I would have had more people in there with me. So now I feel like I want to speak to these things. And I'm like, if you're going through this, you know.
Yes.
But all that to say, I watched the Lord show up so big in my life and in my heart. And there was such a transformation that came through me just with my self-value, my self-worth, like so many things he did that it's funny. I would have people say, how do you even believe in God after what you've been through? And I'm like, I don't know how I would not.
Yeah.
I don't know how I would not. And the truth is, you know, specifically in my case, I tell people this, I'm like, people have choices. We all have choices. We're not robots, right? I could choose to get in my car today, drive through these doors, and hurt somebody.
Yeah.
And my decision, is God going to keep my foot from hitting the pedal? Probably not.
Yeah.
Can he? Yeah, but probably not, right? And so there's this dynamic of like being able to, like, when things happen to you,
Yeah.
in a sense, I am a victim of someone's poor decisions
Right.
that were really bad and horrible, but I'm not a victim. I don't live in victimhood. And I think that I've seen a lot of women go through things and choose to allow bitterness and resentment to anchor in their hearts instead of allowing the suffering and the pain and the grief to move them into a place of growth, into a place of beauty. And I see two paths, you know, and I'm like, we have choice though. We're not a victim. Just because something horrible happened to you doesn't mean that you get to camp out there.
Yeah.
You can if you want to, but there is so much beauty on the other side of pain, to the point that I almost now, when I see someone going through something hard, like, I'm an empath. And I'm like, I don't want you to go through that. I'm so sorry. But at the end of the day, now I pull back and I'm like, I'm here with you. I'm so sorry for what you're going through. But let me tell you what, on the other side of this, if you let it, the most beautiful things will be produced. I promise you. You're not there right now. You're on season 1 and you want to be on season 4. But I promise you, if you lean into this, if you lean into the pain, part of that is not numbing.
Yeah.
Part of is feeling it, going through it, dealing with it, looking it in the face, you know, which isn't fun.
Yeah.
But that's kind of short blip of the story. But I just watched God show up really big and really powerfully, and I couldn't make it up. Like, I'm like, I wouldn't believe myself if I didn't have like screenshots and all this. I wouldn't even believe that this was the reality. And as I've talked to other people, I'm like, man, so many people have these stories of heartache and heartbreak and pain and grief and loss, like deep loss.
Yeah.
And what I've learned is that we don't get out of this life without something.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, he is near to the brokenhearted and he's with you in it. Yeah. And I think I used to think that if I did the right things, that it would, like, I could sidestep the pain of life, and you can't. Yeah. But it's so beautiful and it's so powerful because he is so pleased to sit with you in that place. Yeah. And, you know, there's times where it's like, well, why did you let this happen? And it's like, no, what are you going to do through this? Yeah. Because the promise, you know, my favorite verse is James, you know, consider it pure joy when you encounter trials, which I think is insane. Because I used to be like, nobody likes that. That's who calls that pure joy? But at the end of the day, what he produces through it is powerful. Yeah. So that's
really beautiful. Man, you're really good at communicating your testimony.
Thank you.
That was really beautiful. You know, you said something that I'd love for you to revisit with us on the process of forgiveness, because this is really big. Because there are things in life it's easy to be like, oh, I forgive you to somebody. Yeah. And then there's things that are like, they're not so easy to say, I forgive. There's more to it than that. Can you address, like, you're like, there's more steps to it that are more practical. Yeah. Could you speak into that?
For me, so I did do a lot of like therapy, and I have a Christian counselor who's amazing. And one of the things he said to me was, he said, forgiveness is not cheap. It costs something. And so one of the things I had to do, which isn't fun, was I literally wrote it out. I sat down one night and it was the last thing I wanted to do. Mm-hmm. But I wrote out what this cost me. How many years of my life? Maybe I can't have kids now. How much money? Like, just the reality of the situation because there was basically a whole double life being lived. Yeah. And I told you he was worship leader with me. Yeah. So I think I'm doing the right thing. And then here I am. And there's just this whole, you know, there was a whole second life that I didn't know about. So I tell people, I'm like, man, my world got shattered. But then I also had to grapple with, like, it was a little bit of a false reality. Right. Because there was this other stuff going on this whole time that I had no idea about. Right. So I had to sit down and actually look at what this cost. And as I started writing out, you know, thinking about this lie, thinking about, you know, this woman and all of these things, I was immediately reminded of that song, I'll Never Know How Much It Costs to See My Sin Upon the Cross.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know, and the truth is we cannot forgive without God.
Yeah.
I don't personally believe that.
Well, the world doesn't encourage forgiveness.
No. And I don't think you can actually do it. Like, because he forgave me and all my stuff, you and all your stuff, the KKK, pick your politician, like, think about Adolf Hitler, like he placed himself upon the cross to take on the weight of sin.
Right.
And as I started looking at that, I was like, man, I can forgive a man. I can forgive a woman. I can forgive, you know, and at the end of the day, the truth is this is all a result of brokenness. Yeah. And I don't villainize, you know, it's not beneficial to look at someone and be like, you're an abuser. Was there abuse? Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, in lots of areas. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, brokenness is brokenness and pain is pain. And some people choose to not deal with their pain, and then it inflicts pain on others. Yeah. And so my steps were to write it out. I physically took the book I wrote it out with, and then I burned it as I prayed and sat with God. And I was like, I'm letting this go. Because the reality is that me holding on to something that someone else did to me does nothing to them. Yeah. It doesn't keep them from, it's like, oh, but if I forgive, then that's saying that what happened is okay. Right. And that's not. No. It's not okay. What happened was not okay. It was abusive. It was horrible. But at the end of the day, me holding on to that is only hurting me. Mm-hmm. And so as I sat down, looked at it, and I think that's another thing, we're so busy. We don't take the time to, like, especially if someone's been married for 20 years and 30 years and have, you know, and this happened, you don't take the time to really look at what you're letting go of. Yeah. And then also just with the Lord, I was like, I need your help. I need you to help me. I can't muster up forgiveness. Yeah. I need this to be, and there's layers to it, you know? I was like, oh, I'm good. And then he went public with his relationship with this woman, and they kind of acted like it was this redemption story. And I was like, okay, I'm not good. You know, like I thought I was good, but now I need to revisit. So I think having a lot of compassion with yourself too in the process of forgiveness is being able to go, you know, there's only so much your brain can handle at once. Yeah. I say this with trauma, with anything. You can't, I mean, there's stuff I had to unpack a year later. Yeah. That in the moment I didn't think of it because I was dealing with this part of it, you know? Right. So I think always being aware and revisiting your heart and not just going, well, I forgave, so I'm good. Yeah. And I mean, you do get to a place where you are, but I think we can be a little overly ambitious. Yeah. And so really being able to go, okay, God, I need your help. I'm going to look at it. And like I said, if you don't fully grieve, in my opinion, I don't think you can fully forgive. And grief, there's 5 steps of grief. Mm-hmm. Denial, bargaining, which is what I shared earlier, which was that if I could have done this, then this wouldn't have happened. Depression, anger, and acceptance. And growing up in a Christian home, you know, we don't want anger. No. We don't want depression. Like these are bad words. And so being able to go, no, I'm grieving, and Jesus got angry, right? Yeah. You don't sin in your anger. Right. But I think I suppressed some of that out of my, I want to be a good Christian. That really was like, I got to sit with this. Right. And there were some practical tools that I had as far as, because I kind of lived in denial and bargaining, and the other two, I was like, all right, we don't really get angry. We don't really get depressed. And then and when I say depression, I mean, it's sitting with the like, whoa,
Yeah.
My life looks nothing like it did. Everything got uprooted. You know, I had to move. I had to pack up all of his stuff. Like, there were so many things that happened. And so as I was able to really understand, hey, if I want to forgive this, I have to let myself deal.
Right.
And that wasn't fun. And as far as the practical step too, with the depression side, like there was one day I just didn't want to get out of bed. I was like, I don't want to get out of bed. And that's not me. I'm very energetic. Yeah. I'm like, let's go. Yeah. And I'm really positive. Like, yes, I can be going through hell and I'm like, at least I have legs.
Literally, you would be talking to me and pouring out your heart. And you'd be like, how are you doing? Yeah. But you were genuinely care. Yeah.
Yeah. And that can be good. And also it can be a way to deflect your own, you're like, tell me about you, you know? But all that to say, I think like, as I was able to process, like even just, I don't want to get out of bed today. I was like, all right, I'm going to set an alarm. I'm going to give myself until 2 p.m. And I'm reaching out to a friend and I'm going to say, hey, if I'm not good right now, if I'm not up by 2, I need you to call me. And because I see people sit in depression for weeks.
Oh, yeah.
I see them sit there for years.
I've sat there for 15 years.
Yeah. 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 And so for me, reaching out, having other people surround me, and that can feel really scary and vulnerable because there's so much shame attached to infidelity. Like, you're like, I'm ashamed that, not that he did this, but I'm ashamed that I would be that wife that gets cheated on. Yeah. Like, there must be something wrong with me.
All the thoughts.
Yeah. And the truth is, if I could make it about me, then I could fix it. So it's really just control at the end of the day. Because if I fix myself, I could fix the issue. And really, I had to let that go, you know? So
there's so many layers.
So many layers.
There's 2 things I want you to address before we go. And one would be, well, they're in tandem. So it's not like 1 and 2. It's like they go together. What's the balance between sitting with it / isolation, which I would say they're kind of different. You know, Jesus pulled away to be with the Father, but he was really healthy in community. And what is community? How would you speak to us about the importance of community and practically what that can look like when you're walking through grief?
Yeah, I think practically while you're walking through grief, to me, the most important thing is to just actually be really honest. I think a lot of times we like to kind of sugarcoat when we're not in a good place because it is vulnerable. It's raw. It's hard. And I found myself at times wanting to, you know, I felt like I was putting something on people. Yeah. Like I would share what I was going through and I'd be like, I'm so sorry. This is so heavy. And I actually, do you know who Dr. Henry Cloud is?
Yes.
Okay. I called into his Instagram. So wild. I was like, how do I grieve when I don't fully know the truth? And I was just asking him some questions. And at the end, I was like, I'm sorry. And he goes, why are you sorry? I was like, well, what I shared was really heavy. And he was like, well, yeah, I'm going to say what you shared was super heavy. He's like, but you could never bear that alone. And he's like, the ones who want to and can and have capacity will pick it up with you. Yeah. And the ones who can't or don't have capacity won't. Yeah. And so that really changed my mindset of like, oh, I can just be really honest with what I'm going through. Yeah. And the ones that can and want to will be there with me in it. Instead of trying to shield people because I'm somehow affecting their day in a negative way. You know what I mean? Right. So I would say just being really honest. And then going back to the isolation, like sitting with it. I do think timers are, you know, I'm giving myself to 2:00. Like, yeah, you know, I think
boundaries in the grief,
having boundaries with yourself, because you, like I said, you can decide to sit in a sea of victimhood. Yeah. And what you don't want to do is deny what's happened and act like you're fine. But you also don't want to choose to all of a sudden start living in a place that, look what I've been going through. Yeah. So I also think having other people speak into you and asking questions like, hey, what do you see in me? You know? Yeah. I have mentors and therapists, you know, my elders at church, like, do you have anything to say to me right now that, and getting feedback from others, because we see in part.
It's true.
Yeah.
That's really good. So
did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is so good. I'm like listening to every word. You're such a good communicator.
Thank you.
So with this, like with all that you've walked through, what has God done? Like on the other side, if you were to be like, and God did, I know you've mentioned some of it, but how would you testify to who he is?
Yeah. It's funny. My pastor actually said this to me. He was like, watch what happens in your life when you get out from under this. Like I was under something I had no idea I was under. He's like, watch what he does. Watch what he does to your bank account. Watch what he does to your business. Watch what he does to your friendships. And I have seen God. I mean, when I tell you I could write a book, there's story after story after story of redemption that didn't come the way I thought. I thought the redemption was going to be in my marriage. But my business exploded. And I was
you just won an award. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Last year in 2023, you won an award.
Yes, that's right. Last year. So my business exploded. I mean, that was a whole thing to navigate too while I was grieving and trying not to like overwork, right? But my business exploded. I will say I am so much more free than I was because now I've had enough time to step back and process how abusive the relationship was. There was a lot of manipulation. I didn't know what the word gaslighting was.
Yeah.
There's a lot that I learned, but I watched the Lord restore my ability to trust myself and to trust him. Because when you have had your trust completely shattered, it's a really tough road to walk. But I've watched him restore my trust. I've watched him, my friendships, my family, like there's been so much fruit where I tell people, I'm like, I don't wish this on anyone. And I don't ever want to go through, I will not go through this again.
Yeah.
I'm wiser and stronger and more resilient now. But at the end of the day, what he did through it, I couldn't have gotten without the suffering.
Right.
And I say this all the time, like, don't numb it.
Yeah.
And we live in a culture where I had a moment where I'm sitting on the floor. I'm like, I don't want to feel this. I'm like, God, I do not want to feel this pain. And he was like, do not plug in to anything but me right now.
Yeah.
And he reminded me of Jesus on the cross. They offered him wine mixed with gall. And it was basically a painkiller. Yeah. And he refused it. And I mean, I was like, pick your poison, shopping, wine, like, let me grab something so that I don't feel. But the most powerful thing I think I chose to do was not numb. Yeah. And I think I could have. Yeah. I still might have gotten to where I am, but I think it would have prolonged me. So, yeah, that's what I would say to that.
That's amazing. Yeah. He's so faithful.
So faithful.
I love you so much.
I love you.
That was so good.
I love you.
I'm grateful that he really is who he says he is.
Yeah. Yeah.
And for some of you who are tuning in, we've all experienced disappointment or grief in different levels and different ways, but we just want you to know that we really love you. And yeah, this is like so real. I'm so grateful that Betty Joyce would share like her journey of grief in detail with us so that you can know like, hey, you're really not alone. This happens to people and God wants to be part of your journey and he wants people around you in the journey too. So I want to encourage you, Proverbs 18:1 says that somebody who isolates himself cannot hear wise judgment or wise counsel. And you see people get isolated and it turns really dark really fast. And I just want to encourage you in your grief to not isolate. It's one thing to turn to the Father and invite him in. And it's another thing to do that and go embrace community. But don't stay hidden and hiding where you're not processing this healthily with people who love you. And there are people who would love you through this and who would encourage you through this that can handle that grief and that can handle what's going on. And you can pray them into your life too. God is big enough for that. But you got to get out of the cave.
Got to get out of the cave.
Get out of the cave. And I really love the examples you gave of texting a friend and saying, if I'm not up by 2 p.m., you need to call me. You need to help me get up. So thank you so much. I love you.
You are so welcome. Thank you.
Yes. How can people, you're like Hello, DFW people, real estate agent. This is your woman. Will you tell people how to connect with you?
Here's my little plug here.
Yes.
If you ever need to buy or sell a home in DFW, you can reach me on Instagram. My personal Instagram is Betty Joyce Fish. And then my business is Betty Joyce Real Estate. So you can reach me there. I'm pretty active on there. So would love to hear from anyone. And I'll just say one other thing I wanted to say.
Yes.
I'm a big proponent too of, in this process, specifically with betrayal, is looking at yourself too and like how you contributed. And there's some things that, you know, I was like, it takes two in a marriage. And my pastor was like, not always, you know, but I did realize there was some enabling that I did in the process. But I would say to someone, and this just kind of dropped in me as you were speaking, like, why would you be okay with someone treating you that way? Yeah. And that was something that for so long I was like, well, it's okay. And really it's not. So anyway, you can reach me, Betty Joyce Fish or Betty Joyce Real Estate. That's how you can reach me. And then email bettyjoycefish@gmail.com. So.
Love it. Thank you so much. That's so good. Yes. We don't need to point the finger. You don't need to point the finger at other people. Also ask God to invade your heart and help you see what part you play. That's so important. That's humility. That's humility. We can grow through everything in any situation. Thank you so much for joining us. Please go find Betty Joyce on Instagram, her website. If you're needing to buy or sell your home here in DFW, she's your girl. Come on. She's your set apart woman. And like, share, subscribe, do all the things. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next week. Set apart woman.